Are you having trouble keeping your humidity up? Humidity is super important, especially for those animals that need a very high humidity, like crested geckos, squirrel geckos, fire skinks, crocodile skinks, chameleons, anything like that need a high humidity. It's super important to be able to keep that humidity really high. And maybe even animals that just need a spike of humidity whenever they're shedding, like ball pythons. Humidity is super important, and when you're having problems maintaining that humidity, it can cause a lot of issues for your reptile. It can cause problems with shedding. It could cause them to dehydrate and have to go to the vet. It just leads to a whole bunch of being miserable for your pet and unnecessary vet visits, and you don't want that. So these are just some tips for keeping the humidity up if you're having issues, and this is assuming that you've already tried spraying down your tank with a water bottle or a spray mister and that's just not working. I know that with my fire skink, I was having a really hard time keeping her humidity up just using the spray bottle. I was spraying her tank down twice a day, and because it's winter time and my heater is on, the air is just really dry, so her humidity just kept dropping because she does have a full screen lid on top of her tank. She's in a normal 20-gallon long, and those don't hold humidity the best. So I've just gone through not being able to keep her humidity up, and now that it is up, she is so much happier. It was almost instant personality change. She's coming out more than she was, and she's just overall happier. So I thought that I would share those tips with you guys. So the first tip that I have for you guys is going to be the cheapest, easiest, and fastest thing to do to try to hold in that humidity. And this is going to work really well if you have a very large tank, like a 40-gallon breeder with a screen lid on the top. What you're going to want to do is take either a damp towel or aluminum foil and just cover the screen lid with it. Make sure that you leave some space so that air can still circulate, because you don't want mold or anything to build up in your tank. But a lot of times, especially if you go the route of a damp towel, it does an amazing job of holding humidity in there, and with the towel being wet, it'll trap the humidity in there, and it works really well. I use this most of the time with Sterling when he sheds, because shedding for him isn't as easy as my other snakes for some reason, so he always needs a little extra help. So whenever I notice that he's about to shed, I always put a damp towel over the top of his tank, and usually it helps. It's also super helpful if you buy a moss like sphagnum moss and you put it in that tank. And the way you do that is you literally just buy a container of sphagnum moss from a local pet store or Amazon or anything like that, and you just take a clump of it and put it under water and kind of squeeze out any excess so it's not dripping wet, and you just put it in the tank. Sphagnum moss is really good at holding in that moisture, and if you go back later and spray that sphagnum moss, it's going to hold that moisture in again, and it helps a lot. I find it easiest and best to put it in a hide, especially if you can put it in their hot hide. So again, my ball pythons have their very large hot hides that they go in, and that's where they spend most of their time. So putting a big clump of that in the back of that hide, and then the heat pad heating up that moss puts off a lot of humidity into their hide. Now that's not something that you're going to want in there all the time, because it being that humid in their hot hides all the time can cause respiratory infections, and you don't want that. But if you see that they're shedding, it's always really good to go ahead and just throw a clump in there. And I've always had amazing success with that too, especially if you use it in conjunction with a towel or tinfoil on top. It's also always super helpful to already have a moist hide in your tank. Now this is a must-have for animals like leopard geckos, but you can always do this for your snakes and crested geckos and things like that as well, where you have some kind of hide that you just always keep some kind of moisturized substrate in that hide. So you can use sphagnum moss for Mickey Light, or you can even just use wet paper towels if you want. Having that always available to them, they will just go in there if they feel like they're about to shed, or if they're just feeling a little dehydrated, and they'll just hang out in there whenever they need to. Just make sure that if you have a moist hide, that you are changing out whatever substrate you have in there, especially if you're using paper towels, that you're changing that out regularly, just making sure that it's not molding or anything like that. And even for the crested geckos, if you want to put a moist hide in there, they make moist hide boxes just for them. There's a company that I really like called I Heart Geckos, and they're the ones that I actually bought my crested geckos tank from, and they actually sell little moist hide boxes that you could just stick in there, and they can go in there and hang out if they're feeling dehydrated, or you could use it as a lay box or anything like that, which I thought was really cool. But for most reptiles, you could just have a moist hide in there available for them. Check your substrate, especially for animals that come from tropical environments like the crested gecko. You don't want to have them on anything that's not going to hold moisture. So I found that the best thing for them is going to be things like cocoa fiber or bioactive substrates that are specifically made for growing plants and things like that. Anything that's going to hold in that humidity and not become sopping wet is going to be best for your animal. With ball pythons, I use orchid bark, and Sterling is actually on a mixture of orchid bark and cypress mulch, which I've found to be working better than just the orchid bark by itself. But anything like that is gonna hold in moisture when you want it to, but it's not gonna just hold on to the moisture like cocoa fiber will with the crested geckos. Make sure you're not using things like aspen bedding for ball pythons. Aspen bedding is really good for things like corn snakes that don't need a high humidity, but for ball pythons it's very drying and it's not going to give them the humidity that they need to shed correctly. I've been finding that I really like to mix substrates because it seems to work better than just using one straight kind of substrate. So in her tank she has cocoa fiber, cypress mulch, and sphagnum moss all mixed together, and that gives a really good texture for her, and it holds moisture pretty good, especially now that I've made some adjustments to her tank. And I also have a layer of dried leaves on top from Josh's Frogs, which again does a really good job of holding that moisture into the substrate. And the same with my crested gecko Dexter. I used a mixture in his tank as well. There's a drainage layer at the bottom, and then there's ABG mix to help grow the plants. There's cocoa fiber, there's sphagnum moss, and leaf litter on the top. There's just a good mixture of things in his tank. And just remember to make sure that you are researching whatever substrate you are putting in your tank to make sure that it is okay for that animal. Not all substrates, just because they are loose substrates, are going to provide moisture in your tank. In my leopard gecko's tank, she has that dig area, and in that area I do have a little bit of sphagnum moss just to kind of keep a little bit more moisture over there if she's digging, because she loves to dig. But the loose substrate that's on that side is called Sahara by the Bio Dude, and it's actually made to keep that area dry and to grow plants. So if I were to put that in my crested gecko's tank, it wouldn't work out too well because it wouldn't be holding in moisture, which is what they need. So if you are having issues with humidity, just make sure to check your substrate to verify that it is appropriate for whatever reptile you have in there on it. And lastly, if you've tried everything else and you still can't keep your humidity where it needs to be, definitely get a dripper or a fogger. This is actually what I had to do for my fire skink because I tried everything else and it wasn't working, and I couldn't keep a towel on her tank 24/7 because she has to have lights and all of that. So I got a dripper for her tank, and once I did that, her humidity has stayed where it needs to be all the time. Foggers are definitely going to be more effective because they're going to give you a nice even flow of humidity, of mist, and a lot of them, just like thermostats on heat pads, you can set them to what you want the humidity to be and it'll maintain that, or you can set them on a timer to mist your tank every so often. But with a dripper, it's a lot cheaper, like a lot cheaper. And I actually just happen to have one in my reptile storage area, so I use that. But with a dripper, it's only going to drip in one specific spot, so I have hers dripping on her log, and it's just kind of rolling down and sprinkling the whole tank with water. But I probably will be replacing that with a fogger at some point, just because I like how they look better. It's really just a matter of personal preference. Like I said, the fogger is going to work better, but the dripper is going to give you that humidity. Just make sure with the dripper that you aren't flooding your tank. When we very first got it, we had actually got it for Sylvanas because her humidity kept going down really low. I think it was also winter, maybe, I'm not really sure, but that was almost 2 years ago now, maybe. We didn't really know how all that worked, and we ended up flooding her tank. Not super bad, just a layer maybe this big of water at the bottom of her tank, and that wasn't good. We had to clean the whole thing out. So make sure that you are adjusting that dripper where it needs to be and not flooding your animal. Just let it drip enough to get the humidity where it needs to be. And that's about it, guys. That should help you keep your humidity where it needs to be. Make sure that you are using a hygrometer in your tank to make sure that the humidity is where you think it is. Please don't guess things like that. This is if you've already tried misting your tank down, and of course you should have a water bowl in there. That's something else that helps humidity. But these are the next steps that you would take if you're having issues. But yeah, I hope that helped you guys out. If you want to see pictures and videos of my animals throughout the week, please don't forget to head on over to Instagram and follow me there at l.622, where you can do just that. A huge thank you and shout out to Twisted Sister 90, Crom the Gray, Giovanni Ramirez, and Billion Horses for going through my Instagram and liking a whole bunch of my pictures. Thank you guys so much. You are the bee's knees. And if you like this video, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button below. I put out new videos every single Sunday. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.